Let's start with modern-day relations with Syria. As a country with a history of political and economical instability and decades of civil and international conflict, the U.S. government has been hesitant to interact. However, conflict did start with Syria in 2011, known as the 7-Year War. In 2011, President Obama stated that the Syrian President Bashar Assad should resign in hopes to combat the extreme violence from Syria's ongoing civil war. During this time, Obama also exposed Assad's use of chemical weapons against innocent citizens who opposed him. Unfortunately, Assad did not resign, and U.S.-trained rebels failed to fight him successfully. U.S. airstrikes were launched in 2014 to aid in the fight against the terrorist group ISIS. U.S. advisors were also sent to assist local allied groups. In 2017, President Trump ordered the bombing of a Syrian missile weapons center. Following that, in April 2018, President Trump launched airstrikes again as a punishment to Assad's continued use of chemical weapons. Despite the efforts of our presidents, ISIS still holds majority control, and no significant progress has been made with Assad. Now looking back at Bashar Assad's role in this conflict. He was a medical student with no political interest and became president and chief military leader unexpectedly after his father's death in 2000. He was elected with 97% of the vote. During his presidency, he expanded travel bans, preventing people from leaving the country, along with torturing and killing political opponents and increasing violence with no remorse. According to Human Rights Watch, 2009 Syria has been accused of creating one of the most hostile human rights environments in the world. Anti-government groups are calling for a revolution and are being approached and trained by U.S. military to help fight the growing injustices. Death among these activists are too common, which is consistently a major setback in the fight against Assad. When asked about chemical weapon use in Syria, President Trump responded that the U.S., quote, cannot allow atrocities like this, end quote. The U.S. government has continued to act very seriously in regard to its relations with Syria. Although our policies are frequently being adjusted, President Trump wishes to bring all 2,000 ground troops home from Syria, although some do not believe this is a possible or realistic goal. The ongoing conversation includes doubt that Syria has the military strength to fight ISIS, and that it is our moral obligation to stay until the terrorist group is dissolved. One possible solution is continuing to train and advise anti-terrorist groups. This further education and buildup of these groups could begin to relieve U.S. ground troops. In addition, continuing to send financial aid and necessary resources could be the right steps to limiting U.S. involvement in the future. The main concern is the weak military presence in Syria. This can be fixed with continuing to assist Syrian allies, with still achieving the common goal of abolishing terrorism and government violence.
The U.S. relations with Afghanistan to this day is not good, to say the least. There's currently 8,400 U.S. troops located in Afghanistan as of 2017, and there may be 3,900 more coming in, as stated by President Donald Trump in his first formal address. The need for all these new American troops is a lack of Afghan security forces, which has reached an all-time low at 35% as of 2016. The reason for this issue is the long-rooted problem with the Taliban, a terrorist group originated in Afghanistan, practically running the country and creating chaos. The impact of this is widespread, because the more troops we have abroad means less troops we have at home, though a small amount, it puts us at risk. Additionally, since the president is putting in more troops, it proves that we see this as a serious issue, and an issue that needs addressing. On the other hand, we start taking away troops from Afghanistan, we put the whole country at risk, and risk the Taliban running amok, and also losing a good relationship with yet another Middle Eastern country. Going back to the history of it all, the deep-seated bad relations with Afghanistan as a whole can be traced back to the aftermath of 2001's terrorist attack, also known as 9/11. To start, after 9/11 attack, the whole country was in shock, and the country wanted to resolve this problem as quickly as possible to not take away the sovereignty of the United States. So George H.W. Bush launched a program called Enduring Freedom to attack the mastermind of the whole operation, Osama bin Laden, who was being protected in Afghanistan by the Taliban. The United States quickly dealt with the Taliban in the span of a few weeks. However, the Taliban plot their revenge, so to speak. All of these events, necessary or unnecessary, weakened our relation with Afghanistan, which has not significantly improved still to this day. Lastly, how the weak relationship with Afghanistan negatively impacts the United States is as followed. Loss of foreign goods from Afghanistan that would have been gotten from trade, mostly petroleum and textiles, creates a bad view of America for future generations of Afghanistan, and makes changing Afghanistan from Islamic Republic to eventually a full-fledged democratic state more challenging. The weak relationship with Afghanistan, however, is obviously a byproduct of us meddling in the Middle Eastern affair, which is necessary for the benefit of the country. Most Middle Eastern countries we've influenced, and in a sense, westernized, has become better and a better functioning economy and political system. For example, Iran comes to mind. Basically, in a nutshell, Iran before the revolution of 1979 was becoming a very strong country. The people looked happy, and it pretty much looked like a mini US. But circa the revolution, now it looks like a bomb hit. Some solutions would definitely be to put more troops in Afghanistan and really try to get the country back in order and get them liking the United States and not seeing us as the enemy.
The United States got involved with Iraqi affairs during President George W. Bush's term. In 2002, Congress approved Bush's plan to attack Iraq because Saddam Hussein, Iraq's violent and gruesome dictator, was threatening neighboring countries, including some of America's allies. He also claimed to have used chemical weapons on his own people, and this raised America's concern. There are three groups in Iraq that have competed for power in the government for a long time. Kurds make up 17% and want independence, Sunni make up 15 to 20%, and the Shias who make up 65% of the population. The Sunni have ruled for a long time, but that changed when the U.S. captured Saddam Hussein on December 13, 2003, after searching for months, and handed him over to the Iraqi government to await his trial under U.S. security guards. He was involved in several cases, and the trial started in October 2005. On November 5, 2006, he was found guilty of crimes against humanity and sentenced to death by hanging. He was hung December 30, 2006. Saddam Hussein's rule had come to an end after more than 20 years of ruling Iraq. With Saddam Hussein and the Ba'ath Party taken out of power, the Shias ruled and wanted to stay in power. With Iraq taken care of, the U.S. focused on Iran and Syria, but soon after, President Bush turned back to Iraq because he didn't want them to get their hands on weapons of mass destruction. President Obama had a different outlook on Iraq than President Bush. In 2014, President Obama decided not to resend U.S. troops back into Iraq. He preferred to make airstrikes only and believed that the Iraqi people should defend themselves. President Obama said by sending more troops into Iraq would end up, quote, feeding terrorism, end quote, instead of defeating it. Let's take a look at some statistics. Since the United States has been involved in Iraq, more than 4,000 U.S. soldiers have died, including more than 32,000 wounded. The current U.S. president dealing with Iraq is President Trump, who is focused on eliminating global terrorism and seeks to increase and keep U.S. military in these countries until this goal has been accomplished. The current U.S. policy in Iraq during President Trump is to keep U.S. troops there until ISIS and terrorist groups are taken down. There is no timeline of when they will return home because they do not know when their job will fully be done. If the troops are taken out too early, it will give the remaining terrorist groups an opportunity to organize and rise again. Some possible solutions would be for the U.S. to help Iraq leaders during the future elections to include people from all groups and minorities so that everyone's ideas are heard. The U.S. should also train Iraqi soldiers who oppose terrorism and give them strategy, ideas, and tactics so they can use them to combat terrorism. They know the landscape and the places to look. The U.S. could help them safely take down the terrorists. The U.S. assistance to Syria, Afghanistan, and Iraq rebels is still ongoing. People have mixed feeling about the U.S.'s involvement. Some people would argue that the U.S. involvement is a good thing because we are aiding and fighting alongside anti-terrorist groups who want to fight global terrorism. It is also the U.S.'s moral obligation to aid and protect people who want to get rid of violent rulers who oppress them. The U.S. has been involved in these countries and should just wipe out terrorism and leave the countries. We should finish the job correctly the first time so we don't have to get involved again in the future. In addition, the U.S. has been the world's policeman, and without our involvement in these countries, they would tear each other apart. A possible future benefit to the U.S. would be making allies out of the Middle Eastern countries once the terrorist groups are destroyed. In conclusion, if we wipe out terrorism in the Middle East, it won't have a chance to be further committed in the United States and around the world.
On the flip side, some believe that these countries are solely responsible for taking actions to protect and guide their own countries. It is not the responsibility of the U.S. The amount of soldiers lost and resources drained is arguably hurting the U.S., which could be used more effectively on the home front. Additionally, having such strong relations with troubled nations puts the U.S. at risk, politically, economically, and socially. An estimated $7 trillion has been spent during our involvement in the Middle East. Many are angry that this number is so high and would rather see it spent at home, helping to address domestic problems. Such a heavy military presence in the Middle East leaves the United States more vulnerable to attack. Whether it be bombing from the air, ground troops, or training allied forces to defeat terrorism abroad, the main reason for U.S. involvement in the Middle East is to stop global terrorism. America found terrorism on its front door on 9/11. Finding practical solutions and actions that will work for all sides is key to containing and limiting terrorism and global violence.